Dive into the extraordinary life and legacy of Sun Tzu, the legendary Chinese military strategist, philosopher, and author of The Art of War. Discover the story behind the man whose timeless wisdom reshaped the art of strategy and influenced leaders across the globe. From his revolutionary tactics on the battlefield to his profound teachings that transcend war and guide everyday life, this is the complete history of Sun Tzu, a journey into the mind of a true master. Let the story unfold. Complete history of Sun Tzu 771 to 256 BC. The Chinese military general, the strategist, the philosopher, the great writer. Introduction. Sun Tzu was a Chinese military strategist and general best known as the author of the work The Art of War, a treatise on military strategy. He was associated with the school of the military, one of the philosophical systems of the 100 schools of thought of the Spring and Autumn period c. 772 to 476 BCE, which advocated military preparedness in maintaining peace and social order. Whether an individual by the name of Sun Tzu existed at all has been disputed, in the same way scholars and historians debate the existence of his supposed contemporary Lao Tzu c. 500 BCE, the Taoist philosopher. The existence of The Art of War, however, and its profound influence since publication clearly proves that someone existed to produce said work, and tradition holds that the work was written by one Sun Tzu. His historicity would seem to have been confirmed by the discovery in 1970 to CE of his work, as well as that of his apparent descendant, Sun Bin Di, 316 BCE, who wrote another Art of War, in a tomb in Linyi, Shandong province. Scholars who challenge his historicity, however, still claim that this proves nothing, as the earlier Art of War could still have been composed by someone other than Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu is said to have lived, fought, and composed his work during the Spring and Autumn period, which preceded the Warring States period c. 481 to 221 BCE, during which the Zhou dynasty 1046 to 56 BCE was declining, and the states, once bound to it, fought each other for supremacy and control of China. In the early part of the Spring and Autumn period, Chinese warfare followed traditional protocol in chivalric behavior before, during, and after an engagement. As the era wore on, however, this adherence to tradition became increasingly frustrating, in that no state could gain an advantage over another because each was following exactly the same protocol and employing the same tactics. Sun Tzu's work sought to break this stalemate by outlining a clear strategy of winning decisively by whatever means were necessary. His concepts may have been derived from earlier philosophies or may have been based on his own experience in battle. Either way, his theories were put into practice by the king of the state of Qin, Yin Cheng 259 to 10 BCE, who, by following Sun Tzu's philosophy, conquered the other states through a policy of total war and established the Qin dynasty to 206 BCE, declaring himself Shi Huangdi to 21 to 10 BCE, the first emperor of China. Sun Tzu's work has been consulted by military figures and business strategists since this time, and, in the present day, its lessons on how to achieve one's goals continue to be valued by people of all social classes and occupations. Historicity of Sun Tzu. The difficulty in determining whether Sun Tzu existed is due to the time in which he is supposed to have lived and written his work. The Spring and Autumn period and later Warring States period were a chaotic era defined by the decline of the authority of the Zhou dynasty and the incessant conflict between the states which once supported and defended it. The turmoil of this era, and the later destruction of various works by the Qin dynasty, resulted in the loss of many significant records. It seems, however, that some general at least approximating Sun Tzu's reputation must have lived and served during this time and advocated a policy of total war in order to end the conflict of the warring states and establish peace. To Sun Tzu, war was an extension of politics and should be pursued in the interests of the greater good for all, the conqueror and the conquered. In order for warfare to be defined as anything other than a waste of life and resources, however, one needed to win. Who that man was, though, continues to be debated. Sun Tzu's historicity is supported by two central works, the Spring and Autumn Annals, the state records of the Zhou dynasty from 722 to 481 BCE, and the records of the Grand Historian c. 94 BCE by the Han Dynasty historian Sima Chen L. 145-135 86 BCE. Scholars have criticized both works for inaccuracies and possible conflations of events. The argument against Sun Tzu's historicity claims that, had such a great military mind existed, more would have been written of him than just passing references. Still, there are many entries in both works, accepted as historically accurate, which are given the same brief treatment. Following Enno's observation, critics of Sun Tzu's historicity have a valid point, but it must be conceded that the annals they claim should have fuller accounts of his life do not have full accounts of any significant figure or event. In the case of the records, Sima Chan devotes more time to biographies of those whom he felt had been misjudged by history and therefore does not spend a great amount of time on Sun Tzu, who, presumably, would have been well known to the audience of his day and whose reputation was secure. Aside from the brief mention, the records of the Grand Historian has been criticized as unreliable in establishing Sun Tzu's historicity by scholars claiming it is largely fanciful concerning the descriptions of the Xia and Shang dynasties. This claim might have once been considered valid, but archaeological excavations of the 20th century CE uncovered physical evidence supporting Sima Qian's claims completely regarding the Shang and probably in regard to the Xia. The records, in fact, is for the most part quite accurate, and this would include the section on Sun Tzu. The name he is known by, however, is another obstacle in that it is not a personal name. It is a title translated as the Master, as the art of war repeatedly uses the phrase. Sun Tzu said, in introducing the precepts, it has been argued that some great military genius, name unknown, inspired the work which was written to record his strategies. Historicity and influence. Scholars who maintain the historicity of Sun Tzu point to his role in the victory at the Battle of Bayu 506 BCE as proof. The sources on Sun Tzu claim that he served King Holu of Wu, also given as Helu, r. 515–496 BCE. In the Wuchu Wars of 512 to 506 BCE, Holu wanted to test Sun Tzu's skill and commitment before appointing him to lead, and so commanded him to train his 180 concubines to be soldiers. Sun Tzu divided the harem into two companies, each with the king's two favorites as their commanders. When he gave the first order to face right, the women laughed, not taking the exercise seriously. Sun Tzu repeated his command and, again, they giggled. He then had the two commanders executed and replaced. Afterwards, the women obeyed his commands without hesitation, and Holu hired Sun Tzu as his general. This story has been considered fiction since at least the 11th century CE, when the Sun dynasty scholar Yacheng Tse first questioned Sun Tzu's existence, but that has not stopped it from being repeated as fact up to the present day. Even if it never happened, it illustrates Sun Tzu's commitment to winning. no matter the cost, starting with the discipline of the troops. According to Sima Chan, the story should be accepted as it is in keeping with Sun Tzu's concept of discipline as evidenced by the Wu victory at Baiyou. The Baiyou victory owed as much to the discipline of the troops as the strategy employed. Sun Tzu is said to have led the Wu forces with King Holu, along with Holu's brother Fu Gai, and defeated the Chu forces through use of his tactics. At Baiyou, the Chu forces were numerically superior to the Wu, and King Holu hesitated to attack. Though both armies were marshaled on the field, Fu Gai requested that orders be given to sound the charge, but Holu refused. Fu Gai then chose to act on his own in accordance with Sun Tzu's strategic advice and gave the order to advance. If the troops had not been so well disciplined, they may have hesitated, waiting on orders from the king. As it was, they obeyed their commander, and Fu Gai drove the enemy from the field. He then pursued them, defeating them repeatedly in 5 further engagements and capturing the Chu capital of Ying. Fu Gai's success in the Wu-Chu wars was due entirely to his own courage and his belief in the precepts of Sun Tzu. Through intelligence brought by spies, Fu Gai knew that the opposing general, Nang Washington, was despised by his troops and that they had no will to fight. Following Sun Tzu's advice to force him to reveal himself, find out his vulnerable spots, he compared his army with that of Nang was and found it sufficient to his ends. He won victory from the enemy's own tactics, as instructed by Sun Tzu, by refusing to adhere to the standard rules of war as understood at that time. He did not let the enemy retreat to safety and did not allow them to cross the Qingfu River, but instead cut the forces in half midstream, prevented their mobilization and formation of lines, and even later attacked them at their dinner. Total war and Taoist influence. Fu Gai's victory at Baiyou would have been impossible before Sun Tzu. As noted, warfare in China in the up through the early years of the spring and autumn period was considered a kind of sport of the noble gentry in which chivalry prevailed and rules were not to be broken. Sun Tzu changed all of that. Sun Tzu changed the rules by applying Taoist principles to warfare and by refusing to consider war a sport. Sun Tzu had no patience with the protracted games generals seemed to enjoy playing with each other. Once hostilities had erupted, one's priority was to defeat the enemy, not indulge oneself in chivalry, which could only prolong the conflict and cost more lives. This spontaneous ease of living is exemplified in Sun Tzu's writings, and that he consistently emphasizes the natural path to victory while ignoring the conventional wisdom of the time concerning military engagements. Koller further writes that the great Taoist work, the Tao Te Ching, reflects a horror of war and a deep-felt yearning for peace, and Sun Tzu's work reflects this also in that the best way to achieve peace is by a swift victory or, better yet, by defeating an enemy before war is even begun. Sun Tzu writes, "To fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." His foundational strategy, throughout his writings, can be found in the lines from the Tao Te Ching. Yield and overcome, bend and become straight, empty and become full. Sun Tzu and the rise of dynasties. Although Sun Tzu's work seems to have been known during the Warring States period, his precepts were not made use of until the reforms of the Qin statesman Shang Yangdi, 338 BCE, who may have been acquainted with the work. In keeping with Sun Tzu's vision, Shang advocated total war instead of adherence to chivalric practices of the past. Yang's reforms were implemented fully by the Qin king Ying Zhenghu in conquering the other states between 230 to 221 BCE. united China under his rule as Shi Huangdi and founded the Qin dynasty, the first imperial dynasty of China. Following the collapse of the Qin dynasty between 206 to 200 BCE, the leading contenders for rule of China, Liu Bang of Han c. to 56 to 195 BCE and Xing Yu of Chuo to 32 to 200 BCE, made further use of Sun Tzu's principles in fighting each other. The strategies leading to the decisive victory of the Han at the Battle of Gaixia 200 BCE follow the ideology of the art of war in many respects, but, most notably, in the Han general Han Din 231 to 196 BCE relentlessly attacking Xiang Yu without regard to the former rules of warfare and the singing of the native songs of Chu by the Han army to demoralize the Chu forces. The Battle of Gaixia led to the rise of the Han dynasty 200 BCE to 20 CE, which revived the earlier culture of the Zhou dynasty and encouraged cultural developments including the invention of paper, the refinement of gunpowder, written history, and, in 130 BCE, the opening of the Silk Road and the beginning of worldwide trade. The Han dynasty set the standard model for all those which followed, and so it could be argued that the art of war was the foundational text in establishing the imperial dynasties which would rule China up until 1912 CE. Impact of book, The Art of War. The art of war is known to have been consulted by the warlord Cao Cao 155 to 20 CE, one of the generals who tried to win the throne when the Han dynasty was in decline. Cao Cao wrote a commentary on the work, establishing its importance at that time, but was no doubt known to the nobles who engaged in the War of the Eight Princes to 91 to 306 CE, each of whom waged war on each other according to Sun Tzu's precepts. Cao Cao's defeat at the Battle of Red Cliffs 208 CE resulted in the division of the Three Kingdoms period to 20 to 80 CE, which established separate kingdoms all led by former generals who had used Sun Tzu's work. The art of war continued to be consulted afterwards throughout China's history and eventually came to be considered one of the classics and required reading. From China, the work traveled around the world and, in the present day, is among the best-selling books of all time. Sun Tzu's maxim that all warfare is based on deception 1.18 has been cited as an essential component of any military campaign as well as in business transactions, legal proceedings, and political campaigns. His work has grown in popularity through its translations around the world and has been made use of, not only by the military, but by business strategists, political advisors, life coaches, and others who advise people on their financial or personal choices. Whether Sun Tzu as an individual existed has ceased to have any real importance, as the work which bears his name has made that name immortal.